The first
You
call came
really
at
thought you belonged
7:14
here?
on a Sunday morning.
Know your
Lydia
place,
Haines
clean
answered it
this
the
up,
way
and get
she
out.
answered all early calls on the second ring, standing up, because in 11 months, she had learned that sitting down for bad news made it heavier. The HR coordinator's voice was flat and prepared. A complaint had been filed. Professional misrepresentation. Her catering shifts were suspended pending review. She said thank you and opened the delivery app. The notification was already there, time-stamped 6:47 a.m., account on hold. Document re-verification required. She put the phone face down on the mattress. At 11:15 the previous night, a folded notice had slid under her apartment door. She had read it standing in her socks in the dark hallway. Georgia State Board of Accountancy. Additional documentation received. Formal hearing scheduled. 12 days, 3 strikes, 18 hours. One man who had spent 11 months building toward this exact morning. His name was Devin Reyes. He had once stood backstage before the most important presentation of her career and zipped up her dress and told her the room would not know what had happened to them until she was already gone. He had been right about that. He had not, at the time, been talking about himself. Lydia set all 3 notices on the kitchen counter and looked at them. Devin believed he was almost finished. He did not know what was sitting at the bottom of her daughter's business card box. He did not know what Lydia had built into the system 11 months ago, on the day she set it up, because she was the kind of woman who read every compliance specification and did not cut corners in a regulated industry. He did not know that the truth she had locked into that archive was still there, waiting. Lydia had one thing Devin did not know about. She was not yet sure if it was enough. This is the story of what it took to find out. It is also the story of a billionaire who learned, at 41, that helping someone means asking first. A 9-year-old boy with a blank page where his mother's story should have been. A 7-year-old girl who carried her mother's name in a box through 3 moves and one very hard year because she loved the person whose name it was. And a 47-second clip from a school gymnasium in October that started all of it. 3 weeks before that Sunday morning, Lydia Haines drove to Buckhead in heels she had not worn in 11 months, with her sleeping daughter on her shoulder and Devin's latest legal notice still unopened on her counter. She was going to a job interview. She was not going to get the job she applied for. She was going to get something more complicated than a job. The restaurant was on Peachtree. Table 7, near the window. The woman at the reception podium looked at Lydia. She looked at the sleeping child. She looked back at Lydia. "Miss Haines?" Lydia nodded. She did not have the breath left to explain. Table 7 was near the window. The man sitting there rose when he saw her. Preston Cole was taller than in his profile photo. He wore a charcoal suit with no crease anywhere. His hair was cut close, with gray at the temples and at the jaw. He was the kind of man who had learned to be still in rooms, the way you learn to be still when every room eventually adjusts itself around you. The watch at his wrist was discreet, and she recognized it anyway, because she had once assembled a private equity deck for a company that made them, and she knew exactly what they cost. His gaze paused on Zoe for half a second. Lydia noticed. She had spent 3 years reading half-second pauses the way other people read paragraphs. "I'm sorry," she said. "The sitter canceled 20 minutes before I left home. I was about to call the agency." Preston pulled out the bench seat beside him. "But you still came. I need the job." The silence between them was its own kind of answer. A member of the staff brought an extra pillow without being asked. Lydia settled Zoe carefully, tucking her folded cardigan under her daughter's head. The girl tightened her grip on the small box she had been carrying all evening, an old business card holder, cream-colored, the corners worn soft, and then went still again. "What is she holding?" Preston asked. "My old business cards." Lydia sat down across from him. "She won't let me throw them out." Preston placed a folder on the table. She recognized the staffing agency's letterhead on the cover. She opened it. She read the first page. She flipped to page 4 without looking up. "I have 13 issues with this contract," she said. He looked at her. Page 4. "The image usage clause is indefinite that exposes me to liability I cannot quantify. The performance fee designation is wrong because what you're describing is not a performance. And the confidentiality language holds me responsible for any identity leak even if one originates on your side of the arrangement." He said, "You still applied." Just because I need the money doesn't mean I don't understand what I'm agreeing to. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, exactly, more like a recalibration. She had seen it in boardrooms when someone said something that rearranged the room's existing assumptions about who was in charge. He leaned back. Why would someone with an accounting degree from Howard and 14 years in financial leadership apply for this? That question had followed her for 11 months. It had shown up in every interview in more or less polite clothing. What it actually meant was, something went wrong with you, and I need to know if it's still going wrong. Before she could answer, a boy stepped out from behind a large potted plant near the window. He was 9 or 10, thin, both hands gripping a sheet of paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times it looked like it might come apart at the creases. He did not look at Preston. His eyes went to Zoe first, then moved carefully to Lydia's face, the way children look at strangers when they are trying to decide whether the stranger is safe. "That's Theo," Preston said. "My son." Theo walked to the table and set the paper in front of Lydia. At the top of the page, in pencil, in the careful handwriting of a child who had been taught to press gently, "The story about my mom." Below the title, the page was blank. Theo looked at her. "If you say you'll come," he said, "will you really come?" Lydia was not going to answer that question with a number or a signature or a clause on page 4. She was going to answer it the way it deserved to be answered. And whatever came next, the cream-colored envelope on her kitchen counter, the supplementary filing, the name Devon had been trying to erase for 11 months, whatever came next was going to come. But first she was going to answer this child. She did not answer right away. She looked at the crumpled paper on the table. The title had been written carefully, each letter deliberate. The space below was so blank it felt intentional, the way some silences are not the absence of words but the presence of too many words the speaker does not yet trust. The right corner of the page bore a fingernail mark, where the paper had been creased, and then smoothed, and then creased again. "If I promised," Lydia said, "I would come." Theo did not smile. He nodded, once, very slightly, and pulled the empty chair beside his father. Preston did not touch his son. He let him sit, and let him put both hands on his knees, and let him choose his own distance from the adults who were about to decide something that involved him. Zoe shifted on the bench. The business card box slipped from her grip, hit the carpet, and the lid popped loose. Cream-colored cards scattered out, dozens of them, each printed with the name Lydia Haines and the title she was no longer permitted to use. Lydia bent down to collect them. Theo bent down too. He picked up one card, read it slowly, and looked at her. "You used to be a boss." Lydia stacked the cards back into the box. "Used to be someone who knew what she had to do the next morning." Preston was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked her again why she was here. She told him just enough. A company she had co-founded with a man she had married. Financial controls she had built from nothing. The morning she drove to the hospital because her daughter's breathing alarm went off at school, and the doctors used the word acute, and she sat in that waiting room for 4 hours in her good suit and held her daughter's hand. The day she came back and her system access was gone. The weeks the investigation took shape around her name. The lawyers who told her to cooperate, the license she lost while she cooperated. She did not tell him about the Cascade Heights apartment she had moved into after leaving the Buckhead house. She did not tell him about the nights she put Zoe to bed and then sat in the car in the parking garage and listened to the engine cool because she did not have the energy to walk back upstairs. She did not tell him any of that because she was too tired of turning her life into an excuse. Preston put his pen down. "Can't you prove you didn't do it?" "To prove it, I need the original data. The company says the backups were overwritten." Theo folded the business card in half. He might not have understood words like original data or license suspension, but he understood the feeling of adults taking something that belonged to you and then rewriting the story so it sounded like the thing had never been yours. Lydia looked at him. She asked about his mother. Preston looked at his son before he answered. Theo looked out the window. Her name was Celeste. She was a photographer. New York, Paris, Milan. After the divorce, the trips had grown longer and the calls had grown shorter. Expensive gifts showed up in place of the mornings she had promised to be there. 3 months ago, Celeste had said she would come to Hawthorne School's family story night. Theo had told his whole class. He had selected photographs, written the title, and left the memory section blank because he wanted to fill it in with her. That morning, An email arrived from Celeste's assistant. A shoot in Barcelona had been extended. She would reschedule. How many times? Lydia asked. Preston didn't answer. The sixth time, Theo said. The number landed lighter than the word deserved. Lydia felt it the same way she had felt the morning. Zoe stood at the front door of the old house wearing her good coat and her small backpack, waiting for Devon to pick her up, refusing to eat dinner because she was afraid he would arrive while she was chewing. By 9 o'clock, Lydia had carried her to bed with the coat still on. Zoe woke while Lydia was restacking the cards. She rubbed her eyes. She looked at Preston. She looked at Theo. Then she reached into the box, took out one of the cream-colored cards, and began folding its corners, a sequence she had practiced in waiting rooms and parking lots and the back seats of cars on the way to appointments. A small paper star took shape between her fingers. She set it on the table in front of Preston. "You can keep it," she said. "Mommy can't use the name on it yet." Preston did not look at the star. He looked at Lydia. Something in his face changed, not dramatically, just in the eyes, and she understood that he had just seen what his son had already seen. A child who had learned to translate her mother's losses into a language that would not hurt the adults around her. Lydia pulled the contract closer. She flipped to the blank page at the back. She wrote 3 conditions. No one may ask Theo to call me Mom when no outsider is present. No one may construct additional false memories. After the school event, Preston must tell his son the truth. She pushed it across the table. Theo reached out and pulled the contract toward himself. He read it the way a child reads something important, not fast, not performing, just looking at each line until he had actually seen it. His fingers stopped on the last sentence. Preston must tell his son the truth. He held his finger there. "I agree," Theo said. Preston looked at his son. Something passed over his face that was not quite shame but lived in the same neighborhood. The specific discomfort of a man who has been protecting himself from promises for so long, he no longer notices the people those promises were meant for. He signed beneath Lydia's name and handed the contract to the agency coordinator who had been sitting quietly near the door this whole time. Nobody shook hands. The agreement had begun with a 9-year-old boy checking whether the adults in the room had the courage to keep their word. Her name was Lydia Haines, 36. She had grown up in Pittsburgh, the middle daughter of a public school music teacher and a transit authority driver who had worked 30 years of overnight shifts so his children could live in the kind of days he never did. She had gone to Howard on a full scholarship. She had finished her master's in finance from Georgetown in 2.5 years. She had co-founded Meridian Health Analytics at 27 in a sublet office in Atlanta's Old Fourth Ward with 9 employees and a subscription database. 2 people shared a login for. Meridian processed financial and billing data for hospital networks across the Southeast. She had built the entire compliance infrastructure by hand, every approval layer, every audit trail requirement, every data retention protocol that a healthcare finance operation was legally obligated to maintain. Devon Reyes had been her co-founder, then her fiancé, then her husband. She had loved him the way you love someone who was there at the beginning, with the specific loyalty that comes from having built something together in a room where you were both afraid. She found out about the affair with Kezia Trant in January, 18 months ago. Kezia had been Lydia's deputy. Lydia had hired her. Lydia had recommended her for a promotion in 2022. They had eaten lunch together on alternating Thursdays for 3 years. A week after Lydia moved out of the Buckhead house, her system access was revoked. 3 weeks after that, transactions bearing her electronic signature appeared in a formal complaint filed with the Georgia State Board of Accountancy. Her lawyer at the time had advised her to sign a license suspension agreement while the board conducted its review. Cooperating would help things move faster. Show good faith. Make the whole thing conclude cleanly. It had not concluded. Lydia spent the months that followed learning the geography of a different kind of life. She had once managed operating budgets that could have paid her current rent for 40 years. She had once sat at a conference table in a room full of older men and presented financial architecture she had spent 6 months designing. And she had answered every question without stumbling, and she had left that hotel with the investment that kept 31 jobs alive for 2 more years. Now she checked the delivery app before her feet hit the floor each morning. She worked 3 jobs, office cleaning 4 mornings a week, Delivery driving 6 evening. Server shifts at a catering company on weekends, wearing a white shirt and black apron she kept in a tote bag in the back of her car because she did not want Zoe to watch her change into them. Zoe was 7. She had inherited Lydia's habit of reading everything that sat on a surface. She asked specific questions and did not accept vague answers. She had once stopped in the middle of a grocery aisle, pointed at the store brand cereal, and said, "That one's not better. You just said it was so, I wouldn't want the other one." She was right. Lydia had bought the store brand anyway and felt proud. Devin was still in the Buckhead house, still running Meridian. His lawyers sent cream-colored envelopes every 3 to 4 weeks with the reliable rhythm of a subscription you never signed up for but cannot cancel. The envelope that had arrived that morning was the 6th one this year. It said the board intended to file a supplementary document. Lydia had been expecting it. Devin had a pattern. Every time she was close to stabilizing a new shift, a small client, a week without a crisis, a new envelope arrived. The envelopes were not random. They were timed. She had not said any of this to the staffing agency. She had said she was between positions. She had said the investigation had been opened in error and she expected it to resolve. Both things were true. She just did not know yet exactly how they would become true. She did not know, when she walked into the restaurant in Buckhead with Zoe asleep on her shoulder, that the same evening a man in Midtown Atlanta was reviewing the security logs on his own company's servers and beginning to calculate how to use them. She did not know that 7 months from now she would sit in a hearing room in a gray suit and watch Devin's face go the specific gray-white that faces go when the numbers have finally stopped cooperating with the story. She knew one thing. She had come, even with the sitter canceled and the legal notice still on her counter, and the heels she had not worn in 11 months. She had made her conditions clear. She had written 3 sentences on the back of a contract, and a 9-year-old boy had held his finger on the last one like it was the most important line he had ever read. She drove home to Cascade Heights that night with Zoe still asleep in the back seat, the business card box cradled in her daughter's arms. She did not check the Meridian voicemail. She did not know that Devin's assistant had called the catering company that evening to verify whether a Lydia Haines was on the event roster for the Saturday night fundraiser at the Fairmont Hotel. The assistant had asked, specifically, for the upcoming October schedule. That call was going to matter later. 3 days later, Lydia stood in a second-floor dressing room in Preston Cole's house in Buckhead, a different part of Buckhead than the house she used to live in, but close enough that she had kept her eyes on the road driving in and had not looked at the cross streets in front of a row of garment bags on a mahogany rack. The bags held 8 dresses, each selected by Preston's household manager, a composed woman in her late 50s named Renee Chandler, who had organized the arrangements and was now standing near the door with her hands folded and her expression carefully neutral. Wine-colored silk, champagne satin, black crepe with a wide collar, beautiful in the specific way of things that never have to announce their own cost. Lydia touched the edge of the champagne satin and then let go. "I can't wear this," Renee said. "No one's asking you to keep it." "That's not what I mean." Lydia knew she was reacting more strongly than the situation required, but for 11 months, everything expensive had felt like evidence of what used to be hers on paper and then disappeared with a single revoked password. She did not want to walk into a school gymnasium in a dress Preston had chosen, in shoes that came from his budget, looking like a woman assembled from someone else's money. She had spent 14 months working very hard not to look like that. She opened the bag she had brought. Inside, wrapped in a flannel pillowcase to keep it from wrinkling further, was a deep blue dress she had bought the year Meridian closed its Series A. The year Devin had stood backstage before the investor presentation and zipped it up for her, and told her the room full of older men would not know what had happened until she was already gone. She had walked out and presented for 34 minutes straight. She had answered 11 questions without stumbling. She had left that hotel with the investment that kept 31 jobs alive for 2 more years. The zipper stuck at the back. It had been stuck since the last time she wore it, which was the night she had taken Zoe to her pre-K recital, before everything came apart. She had been meaning to fix it, and then there was always something else more urgent. Renee did not say anything. She went to the side table, opened a sewing kit, and sat down behind Lydia without making it a production. Zoe sat cross-legged on the rug, and held the pin box with both hands, passing pins when Renee reached back for them. The three of them worked in the quiet of the large room in the practiced, wordless way of women who have been getting each other ready for things that mattered since before anyone thought to write it down. When Renee pulled the zipper all the way up, Lydia turned and looked in the mirror. She looked at herself for a long time. Not the woman on the catering company ID badge. Not the mother who did math in her head before anything went into the grocery cart. Not quite the executive from the photographs on what used to be her office wall. Someone in between. Thinner, harder in the jaw, softer in the eyes. Somehow, at the same time, Zoe stepped closer and touched the part of the dress where the light gathered in a streak of deep blue. "You look like the graduation picture," she said. Lydia did not respond. "The one with Grandma and Grandma Ada both squishing you. I know which one. You look like that." Lydia turned from the mirror. She was not going to cry in a dressing room in a house that was not hers. She was absolutely not going to do that. "I'm still me," she said. Zoe looked up at her, easy and direct. "I know." The simplicity of it knocked something loose in Lydia's chest. Her daughter did not need her to become the woman she used to be. Zoe needed her mother to stop acting as though that woman was gone. She was still in the room. She was just wearing a dress with a zipper Renee had fixed, and a sewing kit that was right there when it was needed. That was enough for tonight. And in the drawer of his desk, 3 miles away, Devin Reyes' assistant was adding a line to the October calendar. Fairmont. Saturday, 9 p.m. The family story night at Hawthorne School smelled like construction paper and gymnasium wax, and the particular damp of October rain carried in on 50 coats. Lydia walked in beside Preston Cole, not touching him, but close enough that the room adjusted to the two of them as a unit before she had decided how she felt about that. A few people recognized Preston. A few more looked at Lydia longer, with the careful attention of people trying to place a face they cannot quite locate. She had thought she would hate this part. Preston leaned down and asked, quietly, whether she wanted to leave before it started. He did not look at her like a problem he was managing. He looked at her the way you look at someone who has the right to make their own choice. "I'll stay," she said. Theo stood a few feet away holding his paper flat between both hands. He wore the same dark blue sweater from the night at the restaurant. Zoe walked over to him without prompting, tucked the small paper star from the business card into his front pocket, and stepped back. Theo put his hand over his pocket, pressing it flat, just checking it was there. When his name was called, the room gave him the kind of applause that parents give a child they have seen perform before, polite, pre-warmed, the kind that doesn't quite land because it isn't yet earned. Theo stepped to the podium. Lydia and Preston took their positions behind him, as the teacher had arranged. The overhead lights made Theo's paper look very white. He began reading. He read about a mother who remembered every birthday, a mother who called every Sunday without fail, a mother who had never once not shown up when she promised she would show up. His voice was too even. Lydia had been listening to people read things for 14 years, financial reports, board presentations, depositions. She knew the specific flatness of a voice, reading something the person has been told to read versus something they believe. Theo's voice had that quality. He was reciting the story someone else had decided was the right story. She looked at the paper in his hand. From where she stood, she could see the pale ghosts of erased lines beneath the written one. Every clean sentence had been written over something else. She did not know what the erased lines said. She knew the feeling of having to rewrite yourself into something neater so the people around you did not have to be uncomfortable. Theo reached the sentence, "My mom has never missed anything that mattered to me." His throat caught. In the front row, a child turned to whisper to the child beside her. At the back of the gymnasium, a phone camera clicked. Preston stood very straight behind his son, his hands folded together, not moving. Lydia moved. She stepped up beside Theo and rested one hand on the edge of the podium, not on him, not in front of him, just there, close enough for him to feel it, far enough that whatever happened next still belonged to him. The room went completely still. Theo looked at her. In his eyes was the specific fear of a child who has just been given permission to set the script down and doesn't yet know whose feelings he will hurt by doing it. "We don't have to read the part that isn't true," Lydia said. The paper trembled in his fingers. Then Theo lowered it. Beneath the typed sentences were the erased ones. exposed now under the gymnasium lights. The surface of the paper was worn thin where the pencil had gone back and forth. He did not try to read those either. He looked out at the audience. He found Zoe in the front row. She raised her hand, not asking anything, just lifting it so he could see that she was watching. He began again. "Without the paper, my dad isn't good at doing hair," he said. But he learned how to make toast without burning it. Nobody in the room moved. "Mrs. Renee always leaves the hallway light on when I can't sleep." He paused. "And today, somebody told me I didn't have to say something that wasn't true." The silence held for 4 full counts. Then someone began to clap, not the polished, pre-warmed kind. The other kind, the kind that comes from the back of the throat, from some place that has recognized something real. It spread through the rows. Theo looked down. Not embarrassment. Something quieter, the specific disorientation of being seen without having to perform being fine. At the back of the room, a phone was still pointed at the podium, and at the woman in the blue dress standing beside the boy. Lydia did not see it. She was watching Theo. She was also, in a part of her brain she could not turn off no matter how hard she tried, registering the face of every adult in the room, looking for any face she knew. She did not see Devin Reyes. He was not in the gymnasium. He was, at that exact moment, in a restaurant 3 miles away eating dinner alone, because he had not known about the school event, and he was not going to know about it until 2 days later, when a 47-second clip appeared in his social media feed. 2 days was all the time she had. Lydia went into the restroom afterward and stood at the sink until her hands stopped shaking. She had been hired to keep a lie intact. She had instead walked up to the podium and handed a 9-year-old boy permission to tell the truth in front of 200 people. The $5,000 was almost certainly gone. The rent was due Monday. Zoe came in, pulled a paper towel, and without commentary wiped a small smudge of lipstick from the corner of Lydia's mouth. "Your lipstick smudged." Lydia crouched down and put her arms around her daughter and held on. Zoe did not ask questions. She simply patted Lydia's back in the slow, even rhythm Lydia used for her after nightmares. Preston was waiting in the corridor. He handed her the envelope. Full payment. Confirmation that the engagement obligations had been met. "I didn't do what you hired me for," Lydia said. "You did what Theo needed." That was all he said about the evening. 2 days later, a 47-second clip appeared in Hawthorne's parent network. The person who had filmed it had kept the phone aimed at the podium. Theo was barely in frame. Lydia was fully visible, the blue dress catching the gymnasium light at the shoulder, her hand resting on the edge of the podium, her face turned toward the boy. The school contacted the parent immediately and requested removal. By then, the clip had already been copied and shared twice. By the following morning, it had been shared 16 more times. By the end of the week, it had crossed out of the parent group entirely into 3 neighborhood feeds, then into wider networks, accumulating views from people who had no idea where Hawthorne School was, people who only saw a woman in a blue dress standing beside a child she had been given permission to protect, and choosing to protect him. The comments called her the woman in the blue dress. Nobody used her real name. In Midtown Atlanta, in the office that used to be Lydia's, Devin Reyes sat at her old desk and watched the clip 3 times. The first time for the words, the second time for the face, the third time he paused it at the moment. Preston Cole stepped into the far corner of the frame behind Lydia. Devin zoomed in. He knew Preston Cole's name the way you know the names of people in your industry who have succeeded at a different scale than you. Meridian had worked with 2 of Cole's portfolio companies in 2021. Devin had pitched to him once, briefly, in a hotel conference room off Peachtree. Preston had listened politely and declined. Devin remembered the way Preston had listened, the stillness of it, the way it communicated that he had already made his decision before Devin finished presenting. Preston Cole did not attend public school family events with strangers. Devin set his phone face down on the desk. He opened his laptop and pulled up Lydia's current case file. He looked at the most recent activity date. Then he opened his calendar. He typed a single word in the subject line for Saturday evening: Fairmont. He was not going to make this complicated. He was going to show up where she was working, in the suit she had helped him pick out for their 8th anniversary, and he was going to put a settlement on the table that she was going to want to take very badly, and she was going to realize that the alternative was having her name connected to a billionaire's family arrangements in a way that could be explained, very patiently and sympathetically, to a licensing board. He had spent 11 months building a story. He was almost done. He picked up the phone and called Kezia Trant. The call lasted 4 minutes. Lydia was, at that same moment, sitting at her kitchen table in Cascade Heights, going over Meridian's most recent board filing. She was also eating the last of the rice in the pot, because Zoe had eaten hers, and there was not quite enough for 2 full portions, and Lydia had told her daughter she wasn't hungry. She was hungry. She ate the rice and did not think about Devon. She should have been thinking about Devon. Lydia was carrying a tray of empty champagne flutes through the Fairmont's East Corridor on Saturday evening when she saw him. Devon Reyes stood near the ballroom entrance in the dark blue suit she had helped him pick out for their 8th wedding anniversary, which they had spent at a restaurant in Savannah, eating food that was too expensive even then. He stood there the way he always stood in rooms, like the room had been arranged in advance for him, and he had simply arrived on time. She set the tray on the side table. Her hands stayed still. Underneath where the wedding ring used to sit, her skin went tight, even though the ring had been gone for 8 months. She had sold it without telling anyone and put the money toward the Cascade Heights deposit. "You look well," Devon said. "You shouldn't be here. It's a public fundraiser." He smiled. The smile that had once convinced institutional investors he could see 3 years into the future. It had taken her too long to understand that smile was not for the person across from him. It was for his own reflection in their eye. He placed a cream-colored envelope on the side table. Inside was a 17-page document his lawyers had drafted. The terms were specific. Devon would withdraw the supplementary board complaint. He would confirm that Lydia had no involvement in the transactions under review. In exchange, she would relinquish her claim to Meridian equity. Relinquish the right to undistributed profit distributions from the past 3 years. Relinquish the right to be listed as co-founder in any future company documentation or press material. He did not just want the money, he wanted the history rewritten so that her name did not appear in the first paragraph. "You think I'll sign this? I think you're tired." He looked at the catering apron. He looked at the low-heeled shoes she had bought from a discount rack because she could not do 8 hours of serving in the heels that had been perfectly appropriate 11 months ago. Devon had always trusted her exhaustion more than he trusted anything else about her. It had been the one thing he counted on, that a woman working 3 jobs and fighting a team of lawyers while raising a child alone would eventually choose peace over the truth. Sometimes he had been right. "You can keep the house," Lydia said. "Keep the desk, keep the office, keep the photographs of you standing beside reports I wrote. Keep the nameplate." She picked up the envelope and pushed it back across the table. "You can't keep my name." Devon tilted his head. "Whitmore doesn't know you the way I do, Cole," she said. "And you never knew me. That was always the problem." She was reaching for the tray when she registered the shift in Devon's gaze. He was no longer looking at her. She turned. Preston Cole was standing at the far end of the corridor. The Cole Foundation was one of the fundraiser's sponsors, and Renee Chandler had received the guest list and had called him the moment she saw Devon's name. Preston had come. He had stopped at a distance that was neither threatening nor absent close enough to be seen, far enough that the space between him and Lydia still belonged to her. He did not speak for her. He did not take the envelope. He looked at her and waited for her lead. Devon looked between them for a moment. "You know she was paid to pose as your son's mother in front of a school full of children." Preston did not answer Devon. He looked at Lydia. Lydia said, "Leave." Devon's smile went away. He looked at the envelope she had returned to him. People forgive professional mistakes. It's harder to forgive someone who stood in front of children and lied for money. That story is a lot easier to tell than you think. He picked up the envelope and tucked it back into his coat pocket. "Think about it. You have until Wednesday." He left. Preston walked the length of the corridor and stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her face. "Are you all right?" "No." She picked up the tray. "But I will be. I need to finish my shift." She walked back toward the ballroom. What she did not know was that Devon had not come to the Fairmont only to offer the settlement. He had come to confirm she would refuse it. He had already made 3 phone calls that afternoon, one to his lead attorney, one to Kezia Trant, and one to a contact he had at the catering company's staffing office. Each call, a different piece of what he was going to need. each piece already in motion. The only thing left was Wednesday, and Wednesday was 4 days away. The first call came at 7:14 Sunday morning. Lydia was still in bed. She answered it because she always answered early calls. The HR coordinator's voice was flat and careful in the way that voices are when someone is reading from a prepared statement. There had been a complaint filed regarding a member of the Saturday event staff. The allegation concerned professional misrepresentation. Lydia's shifts were suspended pending investigation. She would be contacted within 5 to 7 business days. Lydia said thank you and ended the call. She sat on the edge of the bed. Then she picked up her phone and opened the delivery app. The second notice had already arrived, a notification time-stamped 6:47 a.m. Her account had been placed on hold pending document re-verification. She should expect a request for updated background clearance within 48 hours. She put the phone face down on the mattress. At 11:15, something slid under the apartment door. A folded notice with the return address of the Georgia State Board of Accountancy. Additional documentation had been received. A hearing had been formally scheduled. She had 12 days. 3 strikes. 18 hours. Devon had not waited for Wednesday. Lydia set the notice on the counter beside the cream-colored envelope from the Fairmont, which she had, without thinking, tucked into her bag when she left that night. She looked at both of them side by side for a long moment. Her landlord called at 2 in the afternoon. He was a quiet man named Gerald who had lived in the building for 20 years. He mentioned the balance that was 2 months behind. He mentioned that he had received a call earlier that week from a party asking to verify whether a Lydia Haines was a current tenant in good standing. The caller had not given a name. Gerald gave her another 7 days. He said he was not supposed to. He said he knew she was trying. After the call, Lydia set the board notice in the kitchen drawer and made dinner. 1 chicken breast, half a container of rice, a bag of frozen green beans she had been managing for 3 weeks. She cooked all of it. She put the larger portion in Zoe's bowl. She told her daughter she had eaten a late lunch. Zoe ate for a few minutes without speaking. Then she set her spoon down and looked at her bowl. She looked at her mother's bowl. She picked up her spoon again, scooped half the chicken from her bowl, and moved it to Lydia's. "I'm full," she said. The words came too fast. Lydia looked at her daughter, 7 years old, wearing the yellow sweater she had worn to the restaurant the night of the interview, looking at the table and not at her mother. At 7, Zoe had already learned how to turn scarcity into a choice. She had learned it the way children learn everything important, by watching, by understanding before she had the words for it, that sometimes the most useful thing you can do is pretend you have enough, so the person you love does not have to feel the weight of not having it. Lydia picked up her spoon and ate the chicken. Her throat barely moved around it. She had once managed operating budgets large enough that a rounding error alone could have covered this apartment's rent for 3 years. She had once sat in a hotel conference room and convinced a room full of institutional investors to trust her with $47 million. Now her daughter was pretending to be full. Lydia ate dinner. She did not cry until Zoe was asleep. She went into the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and stood there for a while with her hands on the cold edge of the sink. Not the violent kind of crying, the other kind. Breaths held too long, finally releasing one at a time in a small room with a leaky faucet and paint peeling at the baseboard. In the next room, Zoe was awake and listening. She did not call for her mother. She pulled her blanket up, turned to face the wall, and pressed her eyes shut. Children sometimes pretend to sleep because they think the adults will feel worse if they know they've been heard. Zoe thought this was how she protected Lydia. Lydia stood at the bathroom sink and did not know her daughter was listening, and felt completely alone. By morning, she had made her decision. She was not signing Devon's agreement. She was not walking away from her name. She just was not, at that exact moment, sure how to fight back with 12 days on a clock and 3 jobs gone and a credit card she should not use and a daughter who was pretending to be full. She needed someone to ask her the right question. She was about to get it. Preston showed up at 8 Monday morning. She opened the door in the sweater she had slept in. He was standing on the porch in Cascade Heights in a dark coat, holding a thin envelope. No assistant, no driver visible. Just him and the envelope and the particular expression of a man who has been thinking about something all night and is not entirely sure he has worked it out correctly. "Come in," she said. He came in. He looked at the apartment with the quiet attention of someone who was trying to understand a person better than a file prepared about them allows. The furniture was old and cared for. There were drawings taped to the refrigerator. On the counter, the board notice sat next to Devon's cream-colored envelope from the Fairmont. Preston set his envelope on the counter beside them. Legal costs, the rent balance, and Zoe's after-school program through December. The amount doesn't register for me. Let me help. Lydia looked at the envelope. She did not touch it. Her wrists still had the red lines from the delivery bag straps. She had not bothered covering them this morning. Devon started exactly like that, she said. Preston went quiet. He handled the small things. The parking ticket, the lease I didn't have time to read, the tax filings when I was in the middle of an audit season. By the time I noticed, he was standing between me and everything that had my name on it. He knew my passwords, my logins, my professional references. He was in the middle of my life for so long that the middle of my life started to look like it was his. She looked at the envelope on the counter. You could pay off every dollar I owe by noon, and tomorrow I would wake up inside a life arranged by you. That is not help. That is the same problem wearing a different face. Preston looked at the envelope for a moment. He picked it up. He put it back in his coat pocket. Then what do you need? She looked at him. Not how much. Not who he should call on her behalf. Not whether he should send Renee over with groceries. What she needed. Nobody had asked her that. Not the lawyer who had told her to cooperate. Not the board coordinator who had explained the suspension process in a voice that was sympathetic and completely certain the process was correct. Not the friends from before who had sent texts saying they were thinking of her and then gradually stopped texting. She told him. She needed a copy of the data from before Meridian's system was altered. She needed a forensic data specialist who could reconstruct what actually happened without breaking the chain of evidence. She needed a lawyer who understood both corporate fraud and professional licensing board procedures. And she needed to be paid for her own work at the rate her own work was actually worth. Preston listened. He did not write it down. He did not offer to decide which parts were possible. He said, "My sister Audra handles exactly this kind of dispute. She does not take cases where one side just has more money. She takes them when the facts are right and the client knows their own file. I know my own file. I know you do. If she works with me, she works with me. Not around me. Not through you. Understood." He called Audra from Lydia's kitchen table, with the board notice and Devon's envelope still on the counter behind him. Lydia listened to one half of a conversation between two people who respected each other too much to waste words. Audra asked 2 questions. Preston relayed them. Lydia answered both. The call lasted 6 minutes. Audra Cole arrived that afternoon with 2 bankers' boxes of file folders and the expression of a woman who had spent 15 years watching wealthy people assume that other people's endurance was a renewable resource. She did not offer a handshake first. She placed a consulting contract on the table, 1 page. Clear terms. An hourly rate set at what a financial professional of Lydia's background and qualifications actually earned. "My brother wants me to help you," Audra said, "but you run the financial side. I need someone who understands the system, not someone who needs me to explain it to them." Lydia read every line before she signed. She had always read every line. Devon had always found that annoying. After she signed, Audra opened her laptop and connected a call to a data forensics specialist in New York named Marcus Osei, who began explaining, in the flat, informational voice of someone briefing a lay audience, that he was actually briefing someone who had built the system he was describing. Meridian operated in healthcare finance, he said. HIPAA and SOX both require immutable transaction logging. You can revoke a user's access privileges, but you cannot delete the compliance archive. The archive retains the full ledger history and administrative logs under the name of the original system administrator, Lydia said. "And who is the original system administrator of the Meridian archive?" Marcus looked at her through the screen. "The name in the archive," he said, "is Lydia Haines." The room was quiet for a moment. "Then we need the security device," Lydia said. "I registered it at setup. It was required to encrypt the original ledger." Audra looked up from her notes. "Where is the device?" Lydia thought about it. She thought about the last time she had seen it, a small silver key attached to her office keychain, tucked into the business card box during a conference because she was afraid of losing it, and then forgotten about completely as her life fell apart around other things. The business card box that Zoe had carried in her arms through 3 moves. The box that was on Zoe's nightstand right now, in the next room, while Zoe was at school. "I think I know where to look," Lydia said. She was going to be right, and it was going to be Zoe who had saved it. The box was on Zoe's nightstand. Lydia found it that evening, after Audra left and Zoe had eaten dinner and settled at the kitchen table with her spelling words. She picked up the box and took it into the bathroom. She turned it over in her hands. The corners were soft with handling. The lid fit a little loose because the latch had broken somewhere during the second move, and Zoe had kept it shut with a doubled rubber band ever since. She opened it. Business cards, white on cream. Lydia Haines, CFO. Meridian Health Analytics. Underneath the cards, a folded catering invoice from March. 2 library receipts. A note she had written herself in blue ballpoint that said, "Call insurance, ask about Zoe Dental, don't forget." She had forgotten. She had eventually remembered. The dental appointment had been handled. She tipped the box sideways over the sink. The last of the cards slid out, the loose paper. Then the cardboard lining shifted. She pressed the lining flat with her thumb and felt the edge of something underneath it. She peeled back the corner of the cardboard. The security device was wedged flat against the bottom panel of the box. The casing had gone soft where it had been pressed against the cardboard for however many months. The metal loop was slightly bent, but it was there. It was intact. Lydia picked it up and held it in her palm. Zoe appeared in the bathroom doorway. "I was going to show you that," she said. "I forgot it was in there." Lydia looked at her daughter. "You knew it was there. I found it a while ago, when I was looking for paper to fold. It fell out. I put it back because it looked like yours. Why did you keep the box?" Through all the moves, Zoe leaned against the doorframe, considering the question seriously, the way she considered questions that deserved to be thought about. "Because it has your name on it," she said. Lydia set the device on the counter. She sat down on the edge of the tub and opened her arms. Zoe came in and stood inside them, still holding her spelling words list in one hand, not understanding entirely what the moment was, but understanding that her mother needed her to be there. Lydia held on for a moment and did not say anything. She had thought, for 11 months, that she was fighting to reclaim her identity for herself, for her license, for her equity, for her professional record and her credit rating and the ability to wake up in the morning without checking whether another envelope had arrived. She had not let herself think very carefully about what Zoe had been carrying this whole time. Zoe had been carrying her name in a box through 3 apartments. Through the nights, Lydia came home too late, and the mornings, she left too early. Through the grocery store calculations and the borrowed library books, and the nights in the car and the mornings, she apologized for not being able to stay and watch Zoe present in class. Her daughter had kept the cards because she had understood, before Lydia had fully understood it herself, that the name mattered. That letting the name go was not the same as finding peace. "Can we keep everything in it?" Zoe asked. "Yes," Lydia said. "We can keep all of it." She was talking about the device. She was talking about everything else, too. The device was authenticated under Marcus Osei's supervision the following morning. The vendor confirmed Lydia as the original encryption administrator. The system matched the key and granted temporary read access under a witnessed, documented session that Audra logged in a formal preservation record. The archive opened. Inside, the ledger backed up 11 days before Lydia's access had been revoked. An edit history. Timestamps going back to the day she had built the system, and an administrative action log that Meridian's IT team had not known to delete because they had not known the external archive recorded administrative account activity separately from the internal system. 2 entries in the log. The first, a device registered under Devin Reyes's administrative account had been temporarily renamed to a credential associated with Lydia Haines at 2:11 p.m. on March 18th. The second, a transaction had been authenticated from a workstation in Meridian's East Conference Room at 2:14 p.m. on March 18th, using that credential. The third, the device name had been reverted at 2:20 p.m., The internal system log of the rename action had been deleted. The external archive log of both the original and revised credential name had not been deleted. It had been recording since the day Lydia set it up, under the vendor contract she had signed as original system administrator under the name Lydia Haines. Audra pulled up the subpoena she had already filed that morning for Piedmont Atlanta's records. Acute asthma episode. Zoe, age 7. Exercise-induced bronchospasm, ICD, 10 code J45, 990. Admission, 1:38 p.m., March 18th. Parking garage camera. Lydia's car entering at 1:26. Pediatric ward hallway camera. Lydia speaking with a nurse at 2:13 p.m. 1 minute before, her credential authenticated a fraudulent vendor payment in an office 17 miles away. Audra set the two timestamp documents side by side on the table. Lydia looked at them. She remembered that afternoon very clearly. She remembered the school nurse's name. She remembered the weight of the waiting room chair. She remembered Devin texting that he would handle the quarterly budget meeting. She remembered him arriving at the hospital that evening with coffee and his hand on Zoe's forehead. She had been so grateful. She looked at the 2:13 timestamp. Audra clicked her pen. 12 days, she said. We build the timeline forward from that hospital record. Every payment, every vendor, every edit. You run the financial reconstruction. I handle the board procedures. 12 days. Devin believed he was almost done. He was about to discover that the system Lydia had built to hold the truth had been holding it the whole time. The 12 days had a texture. Lydia worked mornings at the library table in Preston's house, going through vendor contracts line by line, reconstructing payment histories across 47 months of split invoices. She worked evenings through the catering company's secondary roster, which had not been suspended because it fell under a different coordinator, and she wore the white shirt and the black apron, and she did not think about it too much. Marcus Osei walked her through the digital chain. The payments were structured below the threshold that would trigger mandatory board review, a method called invoice splitting, or check kiting's quieter cousin, or just fraud with patience. 3 vendor entities registered at different addresses shared the same postal box in a strip mall near Decatur. One entity was registered in the name of Devin's cousin. One was controlled through a small trust associated with Kezia Trant. The invoices had been split carefully and consistently for 41 months. After Lydia's access was revoked, the amounts had tripled because nobody was watching anymore. She built the chart in a spreadsheet. Company name, address, postal box match, registration date, payment total, controlling party, color-coded by entity. It was the clearest fraud map she had ever seen, and she had seen a few in 14 years of healthcare finance. Preston brought food on the side table when he came through. He did not stand over her work, and he did not ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Sometimes he sat across the room helping Theo with a model. Sometimes he read his own file, close enough that she was not alone. Far enough that the work still belonged to her. He had learned something in the last 3 weeks. One afternoon, he came in with 4 cups of cocoa, 1 for each of them, including Marcus Osei's empty chair because he had been at the table an hour earlier and set Lydia's where she could reach it without stopping. He did not say anything. She noticed her shoulders were different that day, less raised. She noticed it the way you notice the change in a room's temperature after someone opens a window. She did not mention it. Devin, meanwhile, was preparing his case with the diligence of a man who believed he had already won. He had Kezia Trant's testimony lined up. He had a lawyer who was very good at the specific art of presenting a string of accurate facts in a sequence that produced a false impression. He had 11 months of court filings establishing a narrative about professional instability, financial desperation, and a woman who had made a series of poor decisions. He also had the 47-second clip from Hawthorne School and the documentation from the staffing agency showing the $5,000 payment and a statement from his attorney characterizing the Hawthorne arrangement as evidence of a willingness to deceive in professional contexts. He believed these were his strongest cards. He did not know about the external archive. He did not know that the external archive had been quietly recording administrative account activity since the day Lydia built it, because she had been building it for a company that operated in a regulated industry, and she had read the compliance specifications carefully and had not cut any corners. He did not know about the security key. He did not know that the security key had been sitting in the bottom of a business card box for 11 months, carried through 3 moves by a 7-year-old girl who kept it because it had her mother's name on it. Devin knew a lot of things. He did not know the right things. The night before the hearing, Preston knocked on the library door at 10 o'clock. Lydia was still at the table. Theo was in bed. Audra had left 2 hours ago. The spreadsheet was done. The vendor map was done. The timeline was organized in a single document that started at the March 18th transaction and worked backward and forward with timestamps, camera stills, hospital records, and administrative log entries. She was ready. Preston set a mug of tea on the table. "You should sleep," he said. "I will." He leaned in the doorway for a moment. "Not leaving yet." "Lydia." "Yes. Whatever happens tomorrow. I want you to know that I have never once, not for a single minute, believed you did what they said you did." She looked at him. He was not saying it to be comforting. He was saying it because it was true, and he thought she deserved to hear a true thing before she went to sleep. "I know," she said. "Good." He left. She sat at the table for a few more minutes with the tea going warm in her hands. Then she closed the laptop and went to bed. She slept. The Georgia State Board of Accountancy's hearing room was on the 7th floor of a building near the Capitol. 3 board members sat behind a long table facing south-facing windows. The light was flat and institutional, which was appropriate. It was a room designed to evaluate facts, not impressions. Devin arrived with 2 lawyers. Kezia Trant arrived separately and sat in the waiting area until called. Devin wore a light gray suit. His expression was the composed, helpful expression of a man who is reluctantly involved in someone else's unfortunate situation. He was very good at that expression. Lydia wore the gray suit she had been wearing on March 18th. The button on the inside pocket had been resewn by Zoe, who had found it loose on the carpet one morning and threaded it back on with blue thread that did not match. Lydia had not changed it. She wanted the board to see the exact suit she had been wearing the afternoon her credential was used without her knowledge. Audra had suggested something else. Lydia had been clear. Zoe was outside with Renee Chandler and Theo, who had asked to come because he had understood, in the way children understand things before adults think to explain them, that this was a day when showing up mattered. Preston sat in the back row, close enough that Lydia could see him without looking for him, far enough that this was still her fight. Devin's lawyers opened with what Devin had spent 11 months building, the employment gaps, the gig work, the Hawthorne school arrangement, a woman who had been paid to pose as a child's mother, who had publicly deviated from the contracted arrangement, who had subsequently developed a personal and financial relationship with the child's billionaire father. Each fact accurate. Each fact placed next to the others to produce a specific impression, a woman with motive, instability, and a demonstrated willingness to deceive in professional contexts. Lydia sat still. She had been listening to this story about herself for 11 months. It always started at the bottom of the fall. It never started at the top. Kezia Trant took the stand. She testified in the even, practiced voice of someone who has gone over her words enough times that they have lost their rough edges. Lydia had managed all financial access. Lydia worked irregular hours and frequently approved transactions remotely. On the morning of March 18th, Kezia had specifically heard Lydia say she would authorize the quarterly vendor payment before leaving for the budget review. She did not stumble. She did not over-explain. She looked at the board with the open, reluctant expression of someone telling the truth she wishes she did not have to tell. Audra did not argue. She placed the hospital record on the table. Piedmont, Atlanta. Acute asthma episode. ICD. 10 code J45 990. Admission. 1:38 p.m. March 18th. She placed the parking garage still. Lydia's car entering at 1:26. She placed the pediatric ward hallway camera image. Lydia, in the gray suit, speaking with a nurse. Timestamp. 2:13 p.m. She placed the external archives administrative log. Devin Reyes's admin account. Security device renamed at 2:11. Transaction authenticated at 2:14 from the East Conference Room workstation, 17 miles from Piedmont, Atlanta. Device name reverted at 2:20. Internal system log of the rename action. Deleted. External archive log of both the original and revised credential name. Intact. Kezia looked at the parking garage image. She looked at the hallway camera still. She looked at Devon. It was a brief look, less than a second. All three board members saw it. Devon's lead lawyer challenged the integrity of the external archive data. Audra produced the vendor certification, the preservation record with her signature and Marcus Osei's affidavit, and the independently time-stamped access history from the morning the archive was opened. She produced the authentication chain documentation. She produced the vendor's own compliance filing showing that the external archive had been operating continuously and without modification since its original registration date. The board chair asked a clarifying question about the security device registration. Audra explained. The board chair asked Devon's lawyers whether they had a counter-analysis of the device law. Devon's lead lawyer said they would need time to review the materials. The board chair said they had had 11 months. A silence settled into the room that had a specific quality, the quality of a story that has run out of road. Devon looked at the screen, the timestamp alignment, the gray suit in the parking garage, his own account name in the device log. In the 6-minute window he had believed was clean. He had been very careful. He had deleted the internal law. He had verified that the system showed nothing. He had not known about the external archive. He had not built the system. Lydia had. Audra placed the vendor payment map. 3 entities at different registered addresses sharing the same postal box. One registered to Devon's cousin. One controlled through a trust associated with Kezia Trant. 41 months of invoice splitting below the mandatory review threshold. After Lydia's access was revoked, the payment amounts had tripled. She walked through the vendor map invoice by invoice, entity by entity, registration record by registration record. Nobody interrupted. Devon's lawyers exchanged a look somewhere around the 14th invoice. Kezia Trant had stopped looking at anything. When Audra finished, she closed her folder. She sat down. The board chair conferred in low voices with the other 2 members for 16 minutes. Devon's lawyers sat very still. Kezia sat with her hands folded in her lap so tightly that the knuckles had gone pale. Then Renee opened the door from the hallway. Zhu came in. She walked down the center of the hearing room the way she always walked when she had somewhere to go, purposeful, without hurrying, the business card box held in both arms against her chest. She did not look at Devon or at his lawyers. She sat down in the back row beside Preston and put the box in her lap and folded her hands on top of it. The board chair opened a manila folder. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Lydia. "Miss Haines." "Yes, sir." "This board has reviewed the matter in full." He glanced at the other 2 members. "The record before us does not establish that you authorized the transactions under investigation. On the contrary, the technical and documentary record indicates that your account credentials were accessed and used without your authorization, and that the internal record of this access was subsequently altered by a third party." He set the folder down. "The license suspension agreement you signed in February of last year is hereby voided. Your CPA certification is reinstated, effective today." Zoe slid off her chair. She did not run. She walked quickly, the way Lydia walked when she had something important to do and did not want anyone to know how urgently she needed to do it. She walked down the center of the hearing room with the business card box held in both arms. Lydia was already crouching when Zoe reached her. Zoe opened the box. She took out one of the cream-colored cards, Lydia Haines, CFO, Meridian Health Analytics, and placed it in her mother's hand. "Can you use this name tomorrow?" she asked. Lydia tried to answer. No sound came out. She nodded. She pressed her forehead to her daughter's forehead and stayed there for a moment, in the center of the hearing room, in the gray suit with the blue button, with the card warm in her palm. The room was quiet except for the ordinary administrative sounds of people gathering papers and chairs being pushed back. Devon Reyes and his lawyers left through the side door. Devon did not look back. There was nothing left in the room for him to look at. The civil mediation took 3 months to schedule and 6 to complete. Devon's operating authority at Meridian was suspended by the company's board of directors within 30 days of the hearing, pending an independent audit. The audit identified 47 months of misdirected vendor payments, 2 associated entities, 1 postal box. The civil case moved on the original ledger Audra had preserved from the external archive. Devon did not accept the first settlement offer, nor the second, nor the third. He accepted the fourth. His lawyers had run out of arguments that were not just arguments for spending more time. Lydia received her equity stake. She received the withheld profit distributions from 41 months of misdirected payments that should have been shared with the co-founders. She received a settlement figure that she did not tell anyone except Audra and her mother and her sister in the Air Force station somewhere she was not allowed to say. Meridian's board reached out 2 weeks after the civil case closed. The CFO role. The 17th floor office. Everything as it had been. The nameplate was apparently still in the bottom drawer of what used to be her desk. She declined without a long explanation. She did not need to go back into a room to prove she had the right to be in it. She rented a suite of offices on the second floor of a brick building in Cascade Heights, 2 blocks from the elementary school where Zoe had started second grade. The neighborhood was quieter than it had been. 3 families she had known growing up had moved away in the past 18 months. Priced out by rental increases that didn't quite cross the threshold for news coverage but were, for the families involved, complete. She thought about that when she signed the lease. She thought about it when she negotiated the rate. She named the firm Prism Advisory. The sign on the door was hand-lettered by a neighbor who had been doing storefront signs in Cascade Heights for 20 years and charged $50, and did not ask why someone who could clearly afford a vinyl decal was coming to her instead. Lydia paid her $60. She did not say anything. On the first day, Lydia did not hold an opening event. She put out folding chairs. She made a pot of coffee. She sent a message through the network of women she had met during the past 11 months, other professionals who had fallen through the gap between what they knew and what the market trusted, who were navigating license disputes or financial exposure from the kind of marriages that end with a revoked password and a sealed server and a lawyer's name you recognize from the other side of every table. 12 women came. Lydia talked for 40 minutes. She talked about locked accounts and career gaps, and the specific kind of invisibility that comes from having the skills and being refused the stage to use them. She mentioned a report from the Institute for Women's Policy Research. Women who experience a 2-year career interruption, for any reason, earn on average 39% less than their male peers a decade later, even after controlling for industry and hours worked. She did not read that number to make anyone feel worse. She read it so the 12 women in the folding chairs would understand that what had happened to them had a shape. The shape had been studied. They were not the first and would not be the last, and there was work to do. Preston Cole was not an investor in Prism Advisory. He had offered. Lydia had declined. He had not attempted to route his involvement through a foundation grant or a community fund. Instead, he became her first client, paying the publicly listed consulting rate for a review of the Cole Foundation's education fund structure. The invoice was paid on its due date. No flowers arrived with the check. No gift. Just the payment. She noted it without saying anything. One afternoon in December, 3 months after the firm opened, she was at her desk reviewing the year-end files for a client when Preston knocked on the open office door. She looked up. "Theo wants to know if Zoe can come to his soccer game on Saturday," he said. "And I want to ask you to dinner. Not for the foundation, not with a contract between us. Just dinner." She looked at him for a moment. "You could have asked that in September." "I know. You waited until the case was fully settled. You said not to complicate it." "I did say that." She closed the file. "Saturday for Theo. Dinner can be Tuesday." He smiled. It was the kind of smile that did not need anything from her. He went back to the hallway. She went back to the file. She was smiling too. She let herself do that until she heard the door at the end of the corridor close, and then she sat with it for another moment, and then she went back to work. It was, she thought later, the most important negotiation she had conducted in a year, and she had not needed a contract for it. 1 year after the first family story night, Hawthorne School held its second one. No contract, no agency coordinator, no arrangement. Lydia wore a dress she had bought herself in November, with the first payment that had fully cleared from Prism Advisory's third client. It was the color of old gold. She had tried it on in the store, and Zoe, standing behind her in the mirror, had said it looked like something you wear when you have somewhere to be. She had somewhere to be. The gymnasium smelled the same as it had the year before. construction paper and wax and October rain carried in on 50 coats. When the teacher asked for volunteers, Theo's hand went up before anyone else's. He walked to the podium. No crumpled paper. No carefully written sentences over erased ones. He stood up there the way you stand when you have thought about what you want to say and trust that you know how to say it. He talked about his family. He said his family had a father who woke up at 6 in the morning trying to handle everything at once and who was getting better, slowly, at asking before he decided. He said his family had a woman named Lydia who charged by the hour and made very good coffee and who had once stood at this exact podium and told him that the truth was allowed. He said his family had a girl named Zoe who could fold anything into a star. He paused. And we have Mrs. Renee, he said, who still leaves the hallway light on. The applause began before he finished the sentence. It was the second kind of applause, the kind that doesn't need to be warmed up. After the program, Preston led Lydia out to the small courtyard behind the gymnasium. Someone had placed a concrete bench out there at some point, facing a garden bed that had been planted by a parent volunteer group and maintained with varying success since the year the school was built. The October air had gone cool and clear the way Atlanta sometimes surprises you in October. He was holding something, a thin glass frame. Inside, the paper star Zoe had folded at the restaurant table 11 months ago, still intact. The cream-colored business card it had been folded from still visible in the creases, and beside it, printed fresh, a new card. Lydia Haines, founder, Prism Advisory. I kept the star, Preston said, because that was the night I understood what I was looking at. She turned the frame over in her hands. She looked at the star and at the new card beside it and at the original card underneath the folds. From inside the gymnasium, Zoe's voice reached the courtyard, calling for her mother to come see a very important drawing she had made in the waiting room, which was apparently very urgent. Preston stood in the courtyard with his hands in his coat pockets. He did not go down on one knee. He did not produce a ring. He stood there and looked at her the way he had been learning to look at her without deciding what came next, before she had a chance to decide anything herself. I want to ask you something, he said. Not decide. Ask. She waited. If you wanted to build something with me, not for me, not in a way where either of us disappears inside it, would you want to? Lydia looked at the frame in her hands. She looked at the paper star that Zoe had folded from a business card bearing a name Lydia had been afraid, for 11 months, to say out loud. She thought about the morning she had stood in the kitchen in Cascade Heights, with the legal notice in one hand and a dress she had ironed twice in the other, and had decided to carry her daughter to the car and drive to a restaurant in Buckhead in heels she had not worn in 11 months, because the alternative was giving up. And she was not that kind of person. She thought about the 12 women in the folding chairs. She thought about the ledger that had been waiting for her in the external archive, patient and complete, holding the truth she had built into it because she had known that in a regulated industry, on a system this important, you did not cut corners. She thought about all the ways she had been building things that held. Yes, she said. I'd want to. She set the frame carefully on the bench. She went to find Zoe, who had a very important drawing to show her. Preston stood in the courtyard for a moment. Then he followed. Behind them, through the gymnasium wall, a new group of children were describing their families to a room full of adults. Some of the descriptions were accurate. Some were the version the child had decided was safer. One or two, somewhere in the middle of the room, were simply true. Those were always the best ones. They carried the farthest. Let me step back from this story for a minute before you move on. This is fiction. Lydia isn't real. Preston and Theo aren't real. Devin Reyes isn't real. Meridian Health Analytics isn't real. Though if it were, I imagine its compliance department would be having a difficult few years. A few things in this story are real, though. Electronic signature fraud is real. As more companies have moved their financial systems into cloud-based platforms with remote authentication, the question of who actually authorized a transaction has become genuinely complicated. Forensic accountants and digital forensic specialists can often reconstruct what actually happened by examining administrator logs, device records, and external archive systems that the person committing fraud did not know existed. If you are ever in a situation where you are accused of something you did not do, and the accusation involves electronic financial records, do not accept that the evidence is gone. Talk to a specialist before you sign anything. The truth you built into the system may still be there. Sarbanes-Oxley, which was passed in 2002 after the Enron and WorldCom accounting scandals, requires public companies to maintain documented internal controls and have them independently audited. Many private companies operating in regulated industries, healthcare, finance, government contracting follow similar standards. If you have ever worked somewhere and wondered why there are so many approval steps for a transaction that seems simple, that is why. The steps exist because when they are not there, the Devon Rices of the world find the gap. Asthma affects more than 25 million Americans. Exercise-induced bronchospasm, the form Zoe experiences in this story, is common in children and frequently underdiagnosed because the symptoms often resolve quickly and children don't always describe them accurately. If your child says they feel tight in the chest during or after physical activity and it keeps happening, that is worth a conversation with a pediatrician. ICD 10 code J45 990 if you want to look it up. Cascade Heights in Atlanta is a real neighborhood. It is one of Atlanta's historically significant African-American middle-class communities, home to generations of educators, physicians, civil servants, and business owners. It has been under sustained gentrification pressure for years. If you live somewhere like it, look up what a community land trust is. They work slowly. They are worth understanding. The National Women's Law Center has a project focused specifically on workplace economic security, including women navigating career gaps and professional licensing disputes. Their address is nwlc.org. If you or someone you know is dealing with what Lydia dealt with, a suspended license, a professional board complaint filed in bad faith, a career disrupted by circumstances outside your control, they are a real starting point. Now, a few things in this story that are invented, but that I wanted to say something about. Devon is fictional. The kind of thing he does is not. There are people who use legal and financial systems against the people those systems were built to protect. They do it with paperwork and patience and lawyers who know which processes take the longest. They count on the other person getting exhausted before they do. They count on the resources being unequal. Sometimes they are right. Sometimes the other person built something into the system that holds the truth longer than the attack lasts. Lydia is fictional. The women she is built from are not. There are a lot of Lydias. Some of them are in the middle of the fight right now. Some of them are sitting in parking garages at 10 o'clock at night with the engine cooling because they don't have the energy left to walk upstairs. If you are one of them, I want to say this. The name on the card is still yours. The work you did was real. What was taken from you was real. Those things are not changed by the fact that someone else is currently sitting at your desk. Zoe is fictional, but there are a lot of children carrying their parents' name through every move, in a box or a phone or a story they tell about their family at school, not because they fully understand what they are carrying, but because they love the person whose name it is. That part is the part that got me. If something in this story hit you, leave a word in the comments. Tell me the moment. Tell me about a Lydia you have known, or been raised by. Tell me about the city they are pricing you out of. I read what people write. All of it. Take care of each other out there. The work is real even when the stage is gone.